Hello, everybody. Testing, testing, testing. This is my first live stream. This is a bit of a test run. I've actually never used any of this stuff before on YouTube to live stream. This is all new to me. I meant to do it a while back, but no one was really watching my videos, so I figured I'd wait until I picked up some views and then give this a try. It's only going to be, maybe a 15, 20-minute video or a 15, 20-minute live stream. I don't really have a ton of topics picked out, just some stuff that I could talk about off the top of my head. Okay, so how do I see if anyone's actually watching? Okay, nobody so far. Well, that's okay. That's okay. I'm sure we'll get there, and this wasn't scheduled ahead of time, so forgive me. Going to try to do a live stream at least once a week. Possibly Sunday afternoon might be the best time for me. I'm off of work Friday afternoon, all day Saturday, and all day Sunday, and then I return to work Monday morning at 6 a.m. So I work Monday through Friday mornings, which is fantastic. It's a great schedule. If you do got to work a day job, that's the best schedule to be on. I worked night shift for the last, I'd say, 7.5 years. I was on Sunday through Thursday, roughly 4 p.m. to 1 to 3 a.m., sometimes even later. And that was not a shift I enjoyed in any way, shape, or form. It's actually not a very healthy shift to be on. Your sleep schedule is absolutely wrecked. Family life is very difficult. You don't get to sleep until sometimes 3 or 4 in the morning. You maybe sleep until 10 or 11 if you're lucky, especially if you have things going on, and then you get to mill around the house or do things for maybe an hour or two, and then it's right back off to work. It's just not a good schedule. Hey, look, there's one viewer. Awesome. Leave a comment if you feel like doing so, or leave a chat, whatever. Like I said, I haven't done a live stream before. I've had this YouTube channel forever. Oh, no, they're gone. That's okay. I've had this YouTube channel for quite some time. I just never really did anything with it. Back in its original iteration. Well, when I first started this YouTube channel, I did music covers, like guitar and bass covers of like Korn songs. Racked up some views doing that, actually, because it was in the early days of YouTube. That was cool. And then I didn't post anything for a long time, decided to turn it into a political channel, I think around 2017, maybe 2018. Was kind of doing like edgy commentary, like edgy social commentary from like a conservative perspective, I guess. Lots of cursing and I guess trying to be funny. And I actually found a fair bit of success doing those kinds of videos. I did a video making fun of Jim Jeffries that had like 80 or 90,000 views. And then I did some videos about British politics that had like 10, 15,000 views each. Like it was actually doing fairly well, and the channel was really starting to take off, but I didn't really enjoy that. That wasn't the content I liked. I didn't like being edgy just to get views, and I wasn't even really sure what I wanted to talk about. So my topics were just all over the place. I was kind of maybe trying to be like a quartering, or just take your pick of the various other commentary channels that were big at the time. I was trying to emulate them, and I just didn't have fun. So then I took quite a few years away from doing that, got married, had some children, and got a house, and figured, well, hey, let's get back on YouTube and actually utilize my college degree for something meaningful and fun and worthwhile to me. So I kind of restarted things on my YouTube channel, and it's going okay so far. It's much harder to get views now than it was back then. I feel like it's much harder to catch the algorithm. I've had a couple videos get up, have a few hundred views or so. One of my more recent videos a few weeks back, I think is close to 800 views, which is fantastic. I would love to break the 1,000 view mark again and be able to do that consistently, but it's difficult. And I really shy away from just talking about things that hit the algorithm. It's something I have to be interested in. or be passionate about. So maybe, hopefully along the line, I can start catching the algorithm with the things I actually enjoy talking about. Like I do 2 videos a week right now. The Tuesday video is usually about American politics, and then the weekend video that gets posted on Saturday generally is usually about geopolitics. So I'd like to do more, like do a live stream every Sunday, maybe some shorter videos throughout the week when I have time. But this is all still kind of a work in progress to me. I never really tried to grow my last YouTube channel. It just kind of sort of happened by happenstance. I threw a couple random videos out there, just trying to hit the algorithm with like emulating what other people were talking about, but really not putting a lot of effort into it besides that, and things started to take off. So, I don't really know how to grow a YouTube channel, but I would like to learn. But anyways, I guess one of the topics I can talk about, and this is something that's becoming a big deal here in the United States currently. Well, there's 2 things. You have the No Kings protests, which I think is a complete farce. And then you have this supposed invasion of Venezuela that people are talking about, which I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's posturing, and that's bluffing. But I think Venezuela is in a position where they're not going to receive direct military aid from Russia and China for the most part. Venezuela is very far away from China. I mean, sure, flights could be made into China, but I don't really see that happening. And I don't think Russia's all that committed to helping Venezuela either. They don't really see it as worthwhile. Is it really something in their interest to have like an outpost within America's direct sphere of influence? And I think that's why we're acting so aggressively towards Venezuela, is because we do not want Venezuela to be, say if there's like a potential war in the future with Russia and or China, like they don't want a friendly nation that's like overtly friendly to Russia and China and clearly not neutral in America's direct sphere of influence, like our backyard, so to speak. I think that's the calculus. It doesn't really have anything to do with drugs or oil. I think it's just, it's part of the great game. Just chess pieces moving on the board. I mean, that's really all it is. And Maduro's caught in the middle of it. And it seems like he's very weary of his position. He's made some, from what I understand, several overtures to the United States to try to gain favor with the United States government. The United States government has, from what I understand, openly greenlit CIA operations to overthrow him. One of the opposition leaders was given the Nobel Peace Prize. That was done for political reasons. There's the bombing of supposed drug boats, the flexing of U.S. military might directly off of Venezuela's coast. Now, I will say this. Venezuela is not a great power. I'd say they're a regional power. And despite my criticism of the United States military and its readiness for a large-scale war, it's still plenty potent enough to where Venezuela would be in some pretty serious trouble if there actually was to be a war between our 2 countries, and they know that. Venezuela is not China, it's not Russia. Like I said, they're not really in a position where they're going to get massive amounts of material aid from either party, and they know that. Do I think the United States should carry out military action against Venezuela? No, I don't support that. I don't think it's necessary, but I understand the calculus and why this is happening. Like I said, it's part of the great game. This is why regional powers should always mind who their neighbors are. If they're neighbors with a great power, then it's probably in their best interests to do everything they can to ally with that particular great power's interests for their own survival. I think that's what many smaller regional powers tend to do. It's a smart move politically. It might not be, good for someone's national pride, but it's always good to play nice with your much larger neighbors and put yourself in a position where you don't draw their ire. It's just the way things are. And then you have the No Kings protests happening here. I think the entire thing is a farce. In American politics, nobody really cares if somebody behaves like a king. They only care if it doesn't matter if it's their leader that's acting like a king. It only matters if it's the opposition leader that's behaving like a king. I find that funny and hypocritical about American politics. Everyone will use the word tyrant or fascist unless it's their guy doing it, and then that person is a beacon of democracy. For example, during COVID, when Joe Biden was actually attempting to use economic coercion to get us to take the COVID vaccines by force, they said, well, the government's not doing it directly. Yeah, but you're coercing our employers to get us to do it, to mandate us to do it. It's economic coercion, using a third party. Like, come on. I know exactly what that is. That's a fairly tyrannical thing to do. And people pretend like that didn't happen. They said, well, it was justified for public safety and public health. So yeah, sure, Joe Biden can behave like a king. He can act like a tyrant, but as long as liberals and neoliberals feel like it's in their best interests or in support of their worldview, then why would they care? They don't. If they were to get their great neoliberal Caesar figure, then they would be perfectly fine with conservatives, notable public figures that are conservatives and considered part of the opposition. They'd be perfectly fine with them being stripped of their rights and thrown in prison. They wouldn't think twice about it. So yeah, again, this just all rings. It's hypocritical nonsense to me. They're perfectly fine with restrictive laws and tyrannical actions taken by a leader, so long as it's their leader. And I will say the same thing with the Republican Party as well. The U.S. Constitution is useful to most people until it's not, and then it becomes a hindrance on whatever whatever agenda is being pushed forward. Now, I would say libertarians for the most part try to stick to what the U.S. Constitution promotes, but the average conservative, if there's some kind of national emergency and the Constitution needs to be suspended to address that national emergency, then they would be more than happy to do it. They'd be okay with it. And also, I think what it comes down to is this country is such a divided mess politically that I think it's inevitable that we will have some kind of Caesar figure to fix it, because I don't really see how we can function as a healthy republic in any way when the two ideologies, the two parties that are attempting to govern the country can't live in the other one's world. It's an existential crisis if one wins in a national election and the other doesn't. They can't just happen in perpetuity. Something eventually has to give. How do we occupy the same political space? A political space we're supposed to be okay with the other team winning, because again, these are supposed to be just debates about tax policy, where public funds go, and how the military is used, and things of that sort. That's what it used to be. If the other side wins, then it's an existential crisis for the other. We're talking about two completely different worldviews that are incompatible with one another. I don't see how the United States can carry itself forward, and remain stable if that's the status quo in the country, unfortunately. So I think it's inevitable that if things get bad enough, that somebody with very authoritarian tendencies is going to come in and say, enough is enough. I have to fix this for the greater good. And I think that's generally what happened in the French Revolution as well. Napoleon, I have his biography. He appeared to have, at least at the beginning stages of the French Revolution, been, a faithful Jacobin. Somebody who fully supported the revolution. And I think once he saw the chaos that these revolutionaries unleashed upon France, and that there just seemed to be no end in sight to this chaos. I think he realized pretty quickly, I'm going to have to essentially bring back the old system and declare myself emperor to fix this and keep this whole thing in line and keep this country from ripping itself to pieces, for the greater good. And I think that you're going to see quite a few people in positions of power come to that realization that this might just be too broken to fix. And I'm not blackpilling about it. I'm not advocating for, some kind of authoritarian military government to take over the United States. But I think having at least some figure that's a Caesar-like figure, and what they want for the country and what they're willing to do to attempt to restore the country to like some general stability. I'm not saying that person will declare themselves like literal dictator, but you're going to see, I think, some figure come forward with authoritarian tendencies that's willing to try to salvage our political system. And if the United States were to become some kind of quasi-authoritarian government, it would probably still have the veneer of being a republic, but it would be an imperial presidency, I would say. It would probably end up more like the Russian Federation, where clearly everybody knows who is in charge, and the president of Russia has an enormous amount of power, but there's a clever understanding there, and this is Augustus had this same understanding is, okay, well, if you take a system of government that's been democratic for hundreds of years, you can't just change it overnight, make it a monarchy without people becoming frightened and upset and rising up against it, because it's not something they're culturally willing to accept. Well, you have to keep the democratic institutions in place and make it palatable for the citizens to accept, for the sake of stability. And that's what Augustus did. And I think, if America ends up with a Caesar-like figure in power, if they're smart and politically savvy enough, that's probably what they'll attempt to do to, again, maintain a level of stability in the country. I don't really see another way forward, especially if the country does descend into like some kind of civil conflict, or if things get bad enough where we don't even feel like the government is functioning at this point. It'll be somebody powerful with a large following, a lot of influence, and a lot of money, just like Julius Caesar. It won't be somebody that comes from the gutter, comes from nothing and just suddenly becomes a dominant figure in American politics. It's going to be somebody that already has a lot of influence. So it's hard to say who that person would be, but I think eventually something like that is going to happen. But that's why, I kind of view the No Kings protest as a joke. I think everyone right now on both sides of the political spectrum is wishing they had a king that forwarded their agenda and put their vision of the world forward, and turned the United States towards their vision of the world, and then made the rest of the country who didn't want to accept it. And I think both sides of the American political spectrum are unfortunately kind of there. So it's not really a No Kings protest. It's like, well, we don't like your king, we want our own king. I think it's what it comes down to. Didn't really have much else to say about that. I might turn this into a more dedicated video, actually talking about the No Kings protest and my actual thoughts on where the United States is headed, and so far as having like an imperial president one day just to restore order, and where we would go after that. Would we go the route of the Roman Empire and then just become a full-on, it's essentially just a hereditary monarchy, or would we try to return to an authentic Republican government after so many years of stability? I don't know. It's hard to say. As far as anything else happening domestically, not a lot I can think of that I would like to talk about here. Some of the geopolitical stuff happening is fairly intriguing. You have this. Listen, when it comes to the things that Donald Trump says, I think it's always best to just let him say what he says and then wait to see what actually happens. In regards to Russia, it seemed as if a couple weeks ago, Donald Trump was saying, oh, yeah, Ukraine have it. They totally can win. Here's all the weapons in the world. Here's Tomahawk missiles. Yeah, go for it. You got this. And people thought, oh, well, he just, became staunchly pro-Ukraine overnight. Oh, this is fantastic. He finally realized that Russia was playing him, yada, yada, yada. And then, in typical Trump fashion, soon thereafter, he's apparently taking the opposite stance after speaking with Putin, after threatening to send Tomahawks, which he never actually intended to send. Now he's seemingly telling Zelensky that he had better accept Russia's terms because there's really no other way forward for him. So what does Trump actually believe? Is Trump a realist? Is he surrounded by realists that are telling him the truth about the conflict, or is he, firmly on the side of Ukraine being able to win this war, and it's just a matter of time before Russia collapses? What I think President Trump does, he's purposefully very provocative and says outlandish things to see how people will react. There's always some kind of agenda to what he says. He's waiting for a certain specific reaction from whatever political leader he's hoping to get a reaction out of. I don't think Trump is stupid by any means. I wouldn't say he has the political acumen of like an Augustus by any means. He's more business savvy than he is politically savvy, but he understands people though. And, I think there's a certain method to his madness. I think much of what he does is very intentional. Yes, his personality is that he's bombastic and wishes to dominate. I think a lot of that does come from the business world where it's extremely cutthroat, especially New York. That's the way things are conducted. And I think much of what his political strategy, much of where it comes from is actually the business world. Putting ridiculous, outlandish offer on the table, then, seeing what the other side offers and then coming down from that to something more reasonable, or making, insane, outlandish threats, basically threatening to press the big red button and nuke the planet, and then to see what the opposition's counteroffer is. Are they willing to dig their heels in just like he said he was going to? Or are they, willing to come forward and say, okay, well, listen, this is just getting out of hand. Here's our offer. Let's not go that far. I think that's Trump's strategy. And, that works in the business world pretty well. But when, countries you're dealing with actually have nuclear weapons, very powerful nuclear weapons and very efficient delivery systems, they're kind of playing a dangerous game here. So, sometimes I wish that, I don't support everything President Trump does, as far as his foreign policy or domestic policy goes, but sometimes I kind of wish he would walk things back just a bit because of the extreme, risk involved, and, saying very provocative things to nuclear armed nations, because all it really takes, and this happened during the Cold War, we actually accidentally almost ended the planet at one point because of a radar glitch, so to speak, and had that, Russian, I don't know the guy's name, but had the Russian that was actually monitoring that radar just went ahead and assumed it was a nuclear first strike from NATO, then, well, that would have been it. We're one little mistake away, one miscommunication away from, a nuclear salvo being launched. And I think I wish our presidents and politicians, and yes, I can understand the point of taking a hardline stance, of being tough, being firm. I get that. I understand that all too well. But at the same time, you're really playing with fire when you do that. So, yeah, it might be best to walk some of that back and be a little more strategic when dangers like that are involved. Yeah, be bombastic with other things, sure. Be aggressive with other parts of domestic and foreign policy. That's great. But when the consequences of that dire, if things go wrong, then it's best to probably walk it back a little bit. Anyways, though, I think I'm gonna end this stream. It was just a short little trial run here. This is pretty easy to do. Going to try to schedule a live stream. We'll try to do Sundays. That'll be the tentative schedule for the time being, and maybe more throughout the week if I actually get time. I'll announce it ahead of time and actually see if we can get some people watching. And if anybody has any feedback on how to live stream in a way that you would get people to really want to watch, give me some feedback. I appreciate it. But anyways, I will be back Tuesday with a dedicated video. I'm not sure of the topic yet. And I will see everybody then. Take care and God bless.